In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this portrait of actor Satyrus, who's located outside one of Melbourne's oldest and most iconic cafes called Pellegrini's. Now, Pellegrini's is also located on Bourke Street, which happens to be one of the busiest streets in Melbourne. So to get the shot, basically I'm using my 70 to 200. I also have my Canon speedlight, and on the end of the speedlight is a small grid spot, which is just popping a little duck of light into Satyrus's face. The settings for this shot are, my readings are I'm shooting at f6.3 or f5.6 and a half, and at ISO is 400, and my shutter speed is 1/200th of a second. The setting on the flash is set to manual, and it's set to 1/4 power just to get that little duck. All I'm doing is just lifting his face a little bit. Now, the positioning wasn't ideal. If I was holding the light, or I wasn't fearing for my life on the tram tracks, I probably would have liked to have tweaked the angle of the flash around a little bit clockwise so that it wasn't hitting Satyrus's face. It actually skimmed his nose, so I got a bit of a nose shadow, which is annoying. So once I got the shots that I was happy with, then I asked Satyrus to clear the set and the assistant, and so that I can get a clean plate. Nothing moves. I'm not moving my camera. I'm not changing exposure or shutter speed or the focus point, and that's important. So when I'm taking the clean plate, if I'm set to autofocus, I will get my focus based on where Satyrus is, and then when he moves out of frame, I switch off the autofocus so the focus point remains fixed. This is really important because if you focus on the back wall, it's going to change the look of the shot. So that's a crucial thing to remember when you're doing these clean plates. Sometimes I will ask that the model stay in the frame, and I just ask my assistant to move. But in this instance, I was fearing that Satyrus and Anthony would probably get run over. And by the way, that was like pretty dumb to stand in the middle of the road and then put the models at risk. So please don't please don't do this. Just stay safe. I'd hate to see anyone harmed in any way. Now, the challenges I had with this shoot is this was a Saturday afternoon, so it's peak traffic and foot traffic going across and in behind Satyrus, and I wanted to get a clean background, and the only way I could have done that is if I blocked off the street. You can do that. There is a huge fee involved, so I didn't want to go to that expense for this shot. There is another way, and this technique is something that you should keep in mind when you're doing any portraits, that if you shoot to tripod and lock off, as you're shooting, you're going to have areas of the frame directly behind your model that are not always going to have people in them. So if you take enough shots, you will eventually get a shot where you either have the entire background clear for a moment where there hasn't been anyone passing by, or there will be areas which are clear of passers-by, and you can use those to merge the image together and create a background that is completely clear of passers-by, and it just gives, I think, a much nicer shot. The other thing I've done in this image is I've taken extra images after I've finished photographing Satyrus, where I exposed at a higher ISO to get more detail in my highlights, and I also dropped my ISO. So the base exposure for Satiris was 400 ISO f6.3 at 1/200th of a second. Then I also did an exposure where I exposed my background at ISO 1250. And I also shot at ISO 100 at f6.3 at 1/200th of a second. And then something in between, which was ISO 200, and that was my range. The reason I did this is the shooting at ISO 100, f6.3, 1/200th of a second, gave me beautiful detail in the extreme highlights in this image. In this case, it's the neon signs, okay? Shooting at ISO 1250 gave me a lot of lovely detail inside the shot. Now, I'm not going to merge these images as an HDR. I could do that, but I want to do something a little more subtle. I want to do some exposure blending, and this sort of thing works for interiors or anywhere where you're comping images together. So it's a really good technique. So what I'm going to do is combine my images, and I start off with my shot of Satiris that's going to be the hero shot. And as it happens, as I'm scanning through, and I'm not throwing out any images, you know, even though there's a guy here. If this was a really busy street, I know that I can salvage all of this area where there isn't anyone walking through, and I can also salvage all of this area. So it's important when you're shooting in a busy location like this. It might be that you're at a busy tourist location where there's just hundreds of people standing around. As long as the people keep moving and you can piece together areas where there aren't bodies, you can create something that looks like an empty scene fairly easily. So I go through and I keep everything, but I'm looking for the shot. Even here, you can see that the guy is actually just behind Satiris. You can see the edge of his foot there, but I can go back a frame and I've got that clean area there. So I can actually build a shot, but I'm going now for expression. So I don't mind that. And that could be a keeper, and I know I can go back a frame and salvage that area. But in terms of expression, I really like this next one here. So that to me is the money shot. It just feels a little bit warmer than the other one there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for this one and tag it. All right, so I've got my shot selected. So the next thing I need to do is work out which of the clean plate I will use to be able to remove my assistant. So I'll need to take my assistant and this other person out of the frame. I need to find another frame that doesn't have the assistant in there. So what I did when I was shooting is I shot with the flash, or the assistant holding the flash going into the shot. Then I kept everything the same, locked off my position, and got my assistant and Satiris to jump out of frame, so that I ended up with a clean image. So nothing changed. So you can see that it's f6.3, 1/200th of a second, ISO 400. And so I held that same exposure and tried to get a background where I didn't have anything. And my concern was this right-hand side of frame. So next frame, I managed to get one. So now I've got a clean area here in the back, that at the side here, where I can use this to remove my assistant from the frame. And I've also got an entire clean area here where I can remove that person. But then for safety, I want to try and get a clean area to the left-hand side of frame where there isn't anyone. So this isn't bad. I've got this section here, but I try and cover all spots. So now I've got that middle bit, so I know I've got that, and I'm pretty much covered. And then I got lucky in this instance, and I did actually get an entire background where there wasn't anyone in there. So that's the frame I'm going to use to remove my assistant and to also remove the figure in the back of the frame. The next frame that I'm going to need is a frame to brush in a bit more detail into the Pellegrini sign. So you can see here where I've exposed it fairly correctly. I didn't want to go any darker. If I had have lit the shot like this, I think it just looked too heavy and you can't really tell where it is. So I probably could have created something really moody where I had the sign lit up and I had the inside lights of the shot string, but it was the middle of the day, so it wasn't really feasible to do that, but you can do something like that at dusk. So I've got my base, and then I want to select a shot that I can use for the signage. And lastly, I want to find an exposure that shows a lot more detail in the interior of the shot. Now, something like this where you've got all this lovely neon that could be super reflective, like in an ideal world, if the ground here, where you've got dark asphalt here, if that was wet, it would look amazing. So what they tend to do, if you have a look on a lot of in a lot of movies, you'll see that there'll be a scene like this, and what the crew will do before they get their actors in is they will hose down the asphalt, and what that does is it creates a super reflective surface, and then you'll have all these beautiful reflections in the road here, and it just gives the image so much depth. So if you have control over the location that you're shooting in, it might be that you're shooting on your own street or somewhere where you can do that, then it's not a lot of effort to maybe get a couple of buckets of water and just tip them over the area before you shoot, so you've got all these beautiful reflections. So worth thinking about. So that's just on a little side note there. But the final option there is to just choose a frame that's going to be my interior. So I've got all my images selected. Let's now build the shot. Okay, so let's now combine these images. So I've got my hero shot. I'm happiest with the expression here, but I've got Anthony, the assistant, in the frame, got another pair of legs there, and this guy. Now, as I said, I did get lucky with this image in that I managed to get a completely clear frame, but like this isn't always the case. So even if I hadn't, I have enough here to be able to build a shot using some of the other frames in there. So I can look and I can see that, so what I want is a clean area here and a clean area here. And sometimes it's not always available in a couple of shots, but I can see that in this frame here, I've got that whole area clean. So it's basically, he's in the frame, but the entire right side of the frame is available to me. So I could have used that, and there's some other frames as well that I could have used. So it's always handy to know, but just for ease of use, I'm going to go with the cleanest plate, which is this one here. So the first thing I want to do is I'll just make sure I've got all my selections up on their own. The first thing I want to do is merge this shot, the hero with Satyrus in it, and this background, and merge those two together so that I can really quickly remove this guy here and my assistant. So before I combine these shots, what I want to do is just quickly do some basic edits to this one. So first off, I just want to make sure that I've got a good white balance. So what I can do is just come in, let's see, there's a good white area here, so I'll do a white balance off the wall there, and that's pretty good. So let's have a look. We can see before and after, so it wasn't far off in terms of the white balance there. If I do an auto, it's going to be a lot more neutral. I think I like the one that I did, so I'm going to go back. So just pick that neutral area of white there, or anywhere that it's an unlit white, or if you can see a mid-grey, which I could probably pick up that there. That adds too much magenta, so I think there's a lot of green. So I think I was pretty much on the money the first time, so I'm happy with that. So that's my white balance. Next, I just want to give the image overall a little tweak. So I want to make sure that I've got a good black in the image. So that's holding down the Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC and just sliding across. Plenty of good blacks in that. Let's make sure I've got a good white point. So again, holding down the Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC and sliding across just so I can just see like one little grain. That's all I need, is one good white point. So let's have a look. We've got before, after, not a huge amount there. Now, if I only had this frame, I would probably open up the shadows to bring a little bit of detail there. But have a look what happens if I zoom in there. When I open up those shadows, I've got a lot of noise. I already have an image where I upped my ISO, and even though this is an ISO of 1250, it's not nearly as noisy as what happens when you open up the shadows. So I think I'm going to stick with the this exposure, and because the opening up the shadows affects the whole image overall. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it there. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do to that image. Then I'm going to select the next one along. Okay, so I've got these two selected and I'm going to hit sync. And basically what that does is all the adjustments I applied to this image have now been applied to that image. So the color balance is the same. The black adjustment is the same. The tone's the same. It's the same image. So when I blend the two, it should blend together nicely. All right. So now what I need to do is select the two images, right click, and go down to Edit. Now I've got the choice. I can edit in Photoshop, which will open the two images individually, or I can go down and I can hit Open as layers in Photoshop, and what that will do is it will open each of the files and then stack them in layers, which is what we want. So we'll do that. Okay, so here's my image here, and you can see I've got the image of Satyrus on the top and the image with just the clean background on the bottom. Now you can see as I move from top to bottom that it's slightly out of register, so I probably knocked something when I took the two frames. So what I'll do is select both top and bottom layer, go down to edit, auto align layers, check auto and OK. So what Photoshop has done now is it's just tweaked the layers so that they're both exactly aligned, because they were just out before. So you can see what a good job Photoshop has done in aligning the two files. So if I click on and off Satiris, it's exactly the same. It's nothing's moved. So I know that my two files match up. Now all I need to do is the easy task of getting rid of the people in the background and moving the assistant out, and also this little leg. So I've got my top layer selected, okay, and I'll just move that off screen. Oh, hang on, better show you this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer mask. All right, so this has now made this a non-destructive way of editing. So that means that if I select, let me just move this across, make some space here. If I select my white brush, I can brush, sorry. If I select my black brush, I can brush over here in black, and it's going to, you can see there in the mask, it's going to remove that part of the top layer and reveal what's underneath. So all I'm doing is brushing in and getting rid of Anthony and bringing in the wall in the background. Now you'll see that there's a slight difference in the tone. So it may have been that the sun was going in and out, like the exposure is exactly the same. So what I might do, just to make it look a little bit better, is just to match my brushing up to like the edge of something, so it doesn't just suddenly change color. So you can do it a little bit more gently there. So I'll just move this guy across a little bit. All right, so that's as easy as that to get rid of someone from the background. And what I'm doing now is I'm just brushing in the ground there, and what I can do is just knock the flow back just so it feathers in a little bit nicer along this edge here, and blends in a little bit nicer. All right, but aside from that, I think that's looking pretty good. I've managed to what did that take? Under a minute. Get rid of the assistant. All right, so that's that. I'm happy with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is commit to that. And now I'm going to add a little bit more detail to this sign. I'm not sure if it even needs it, and also add some more detail into this area here by combining layers, and then I'll tweak the image overall. So just make sure that I've got everything that I need in there, and that's all going. I think that's looking good. All right, so let's now bring in some detail into this area here, into the shop front. When you save an image in Photoshop that you've edited from Lightroom, what happens once you save it is it comes back into Lightroom as a TIFF. So that's the image there, which is a combination of this image and the background image, and what Photoshop has done is it's merged those into a TIFF file and then stored it back in Lightroom for me. So I've got my originals and I've got my edit all in one place, which is really cool. The next thing I want to do is bring in some of the detail in this area here using this lighter file, and bring in a little bit more detail into the sign just to show you what's possible using this darker image. So this is the image shot at ISO 200, and this is the image shot at ISO 1250, and here's the merged file that I created. Before I do that, I want to make sure that the original image that I used, which has the white balance settings, and I tweaked the blacks and added some white, I want to make sure that I apply, I've already done that actually, I apply those settings to the images that I'm going to also merge in with my layers, so that I know they're all going to have the same look about them. So it's really important that you come from the same base as a color temperature, and they're very similar in terms of the contrast and the look of the file. So this file now has the same look, it's just a little bit darker as the original, and so does this one here. So you'll see that the color temperature, tint, whites, black, all match up. They're all the same. So the next step is to take my edited version with the people removed and to select my darker exposure, that one there, and to also select the lighter exposure. Okay, so again, it's the same step we did when I was removing the assistant and the person in the background. Right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. All right, so there it is. There's my original, my darker file, and underneath the lighter file. So what I'm going to do now is select all the images, go up to edit, auto align layers, tick auto and press OK. And now Photoshop is going to merge those images together, and if there was any slight movement it addresses that, but now you can see that all the layers are aligned. So now what I can do is I can use this image to brush in the highlights, the neon areas, and I can use this image to bring back some detail into the shop here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to brush on this image here. So I'm going to create a layer mask. So that's it there. All right, then I'm going to get my black brush and come in. I'll just make some space here for myself. Let's move that over a little bit. And I'll just open that up so you can see where there was a little bit of overlap where the camera moved slightly, but I've got everything that I need here. So what I want to do is, you can see that the slightly darker image gives a really nice neon glow to the light. So I'm going to brush some of that back in. So I've got a nice big brush, soft brush. I might actually just reduce the size of the brush just to make it the same size as the neon sign. And I'm going to reduce my flow to about 10%, and opacity is set to 100%. And basically I'm just going to brush over that top area in here with the layer mask selected to bring back some of this detail underneath. So I'm just coming in and brushing over. And you can see in the layer mask where I'm removing, and I can go in and just brush in more detail. So it just comes in really handy. So you can imagine if you've got a bright scene outside a window and you want to bring in some more detail, you could use it for that. It's got all sorts of really handy uses. The other areas I might brush in, this little neon sign here, just brighten it up. It doesn't need a lot because it's already pretty good. And a few other things that I might want to do is maybe just drop the exposure up here on the wall a little bit, because I've got the darker image underneath, so I can just burn that in a little bit. Maybe the top of the building here. All right, so that's that. And maybe if I wanted to, I can also just make the ground a little bit darker, just using the layer underneath, which is kind of a nicer way to do it. You could probably do this with dodging and burning, but there's I just want to show you what's possible. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and combine these two images up onto their own layer. So I'm going to unclick that bottom layer, which is the interior of the restaurant, the brighter exposure, and just with these two selected, I'm going to go to Command Option Select E and pop those up onto their own layer. Okay, and then I can turn those ones off. And now I'm working with this bottom layer. So it's this layer that I want to work with, and I want to bring in all this lovely detail. So I've turned off these other layers, and I'm just focusing on this top layer, which is basically these two layers merged together. But I've still got all my work here underneath in case I decide that I don't like what I'm doing, and I can backtrack a little bit. All right, so now what I'm going to do is create another layer mask. All right, and now I'm going to brush back some detail in this area. So it's the exact same process. I've got my large brush, opacity 100. I'm going to have my flow at around 15%, and I've got my foreground color set to black. And I'm now going to come in, and I can now brush in all the beautiful detail which is inside the restaurant, and just brighten that up a little bit. And I just want to focus on the actual what's coming through in the window, rather than trying to dodge the sign as well. So that's all that there. And if I wanted to, I could increase the opacity so I get a little bit more. But you can see what's going on and what's possible. All right, so I think that's looking good there. I've got enough detail. And I'll just show you back in the history. So that was before, and that's bringing in the detail, which is quite nice. And again, you could do this as an HDR, but I think you've got so much more control this way, because you're just brushing in the areas where you want to brush in, and so it allows you to, I think, create a more sophisticated edit if you've got the time to do that. So I'm pretty happy with that. The other thing that I would like to do is just brighten up Pellegrini's here, the sign, and I think I might do that with burn and dodge, and I just want to finesse the image overall. But once I'm happy with how it's looking, which I am, but what I want to do is just come back here and remove the fact that I took off some of the neon sign. So just bring that back in. All right, so white removes the edit and black adds it. So if I come back, it goes back to where it was. And if I come back with white, I can bring back the detail like that. All right, so once I'm happy with that, I'm happy with my merged image and I've got my layers all looking good. I've got enough light on the inside of the shop. I've got my Pellegrini sign looking really good. I can now work on the rest of the image. So what I'm going to do now is merge all of that up onto its own layer. So Command, Option, Shift, E. And now all of these layers popped up onto their own layer, and I can now go ahead and edit that in the way that I normally would. So the first thing I think I want to do is just come in here, and I mentioned that I really wasn't happy with the angle of the grid spot. You've got to be so careful with hard light. It's coming across his face. When you're working with grid, it really needs to be a bit flatter on the face so you don't get this ugly nose shadow. So I'm going to address that next. Okay, so to finish this off, what I'm going to do is again bring it up onto its own layer, and then what I want to do is bring my favorite action of the moment. I'll put a bit of True Grit light onto that, press play. Okay, so there's before, there's after, just giving it a bit of edge. That's my signature look. I'm happy with that. If you know, have a series of actions that you do to all your images, it's probably a good idea to create your own signature actions so that you have a consistency in your workflow. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now I might just finish off with a bit of burning and dodging. So I'll hit highlight curves, shadow curves, back to my layers. So I might do a little bit of burning and dodging here in certain areas. So I'll just knock him back a little bit. Again, I just like the idea of the road being a bit darker. As you can see before and after. Just darken this wall down a little bit up here. That's what I wanted to do. These, the sign, Pellegrini's, I don't think it pops enough, so I want to brighten that up. So I'll just go over it. So I've got my layer mask on lighter. So you have all these actions. I think they were a download last month, so you can just go in the download section and grab these. So like, just have a look at the sign. It's subtle now. I might bring up the flow so you can see it a bit better. And all I'm doing is going over the letter and just giving it a bit more pop, because I just want it to stand out a bit more. It was kind of looking a little bit dull. So let's have a look. There's before, there's after. It's looking a lot better. All right, so there it is. And to finish it off, I can flatten it all off and crop it, and then that image is done. I probably would also just get rid of that sign there. All right, so just to finish off this image, I just want to get rid of a few of the distracting things. This little sign here, I don't like this sign here, and I don't like the reflection here. So this is like, I guess, the retouching skin on a portrait where there might be a few blemishes that kind of detract from the overall image. You don't have to do it. It's possibly overkill, but I just want to show you anyway. So first thing I'm going to do is I've got my original file here. I'm going to Command J, create a new layer, and I'm going to come in, and what I'm going to do is I'll show you with this getting rid of this sign here, I can actually use the content aware fill, which is a tool where you make a selection of the area you want to get rid of, go down to edit, fill, content aware is in the drop down box, your mode is normal, opacity is 100%, and I'll show you what Photoshop does. On the surface it looks like it does an okay job. As an image like that in the background, you're not really going to notice, but like you can see if I come in, what it's done is it hasn't quite matched up the line of the brickwork there, so you can tell it's been fixed. So it's not ideal. So let me just get rid of that and I'll show you another way. All right, so I've got my new layer selected. What I'm going to do on top of that is create a new empty layer. Okay, and I'm going to use the clone tool, and this also works with skin. So what I'm going to do is I've got my mode set to normal, opacity 100, and I'm going to bring my flow up so I can sort of get this done quickly. So flow 30%, you're sampling current and below. That's important because if I don't do that, I'm just trying to retouch an empty layer. So I've got my layer selected. I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or Alt on a PC to sample the area that I want to clone, and then I just work over there. Now you can see again, I'm having the same issue, is I'm not getting the bricks to match up. So you can see that here's the original and the bricks aren't quite lining up. So what I can do though is, because this is on its own empty layer, I can now select the move tool and move the whole new cloned area to match up with the area that I need it to be. And so now I've got a much nicer clone, particularly where you've got lines or obvious patterns and things like that. So that's a really handy way to clone areas that you need to do. So I'm going to now just finish that off and just in there. So we've now got before and after. So I've managed to get rid of that sign. Let's now tackle the sign in the corner. So this little street sign that's just poking in is a really easy fix, and this is a good way to use the content aware fill tool. So I've just selected the area, being careful not to cut into the top of the shop front there. So I've just selected all brick, and I go to edit, fill, content aware, blend mode normal, opacity 100%, press OK, and it's done a really good job. You can see before, after, it looks good. All right, so the last thing I want to do is just tackle this reflection here of the car. It just bothers me. So again, all I want to do is clone out the car and just use this sort of tone here, and perhaps just get rid of the reflection altogether. So what I'm going to do is, just so that I'm not damaging the rest of the image, what I like to do is just make a selection if I want to do a quick retouch, and just making a selection, and all I'm doing is just cloning in what's already there, which is the black background, and just getting rid of the car altogether, because and so it's pretty much matching this other side here. There's nothing really, it wasn't that exciting a reflection anyway, so just got rid of that. I think it's like it was a bit distracting. And then if I wanted to, I could just come along and get rid of some of the rubbish on the road if I wanted to just make it all really perfect. But I'm pretty happy with that. I don't mind some of that debris there, but you know, you can also use the patch tool. That does a good job just getting rid of areas like that. So there you go. Here's the original and Lightroom, then with the assistant and background passerby removed, a few adjustments in Photoshop, and then the final tweaking in Photoshop to get rid of those little blemishes that I didn't like.